This is a panel hosted by Pride. This is about micro-labels, what they mean, their a little bit about the community impact, but maybe not the best. Okay, I'm going for it. Okay. Yeah, so basically, yeah, micro-labels. Before I flubber on, let's go, and we have an audience question for our, our lovely audience. But essentially, like, before we get started, I kind of wanted to go into, like, the idea of, like, you know, we're Pride, you know, we're the LGBT organization on campus and everything. So with us, we have some of our members with us tonight. It's 5 p.m. It's, but yes, I just wanted to go over, like, hey, if anyone wants to answer, what does queerness mean to y'all, you know? So if anyone wants to, and if not, we can. If we don't, it's okay. It's cool. We don't have to. We're good? Okay. All right.
We don't really have an audience tonight.
It's
so
fine.
We're just gonna
We're
go
winging
with
it.
the professor's definition on this.
We are winging it. It's cool. Yeah. So, like, there's a lot of different ways to define queerness. I did want to get some, like, formal definitions out there just so, like, we, like, have kind of like a good, like, a decent idea of, like, what it generally means, though a lot of people define it in a lot of different ways. For this, I wanted to describe it as, like, basically, you're essentially queer, you know, if you identify as, like, a certain sexuality or gender or something similar, such as, for instance, being intersex, for instance, is, like, a part generally welcomed in the LGBT community as well. So it's generally anything that goes along that line, really. So yeah, that's how we want to, like, how we're trying to define queerness anyway, in terms of, like, again, there's plenty of different ways to define it, but that's just one of them. I also wanted to go into a definition of, like, what sexuality means, since we kind of went over that in queerness, but just going over that a bit more. Sexuality is essentially, like, what your sexual attraction is towards other people. Like, if you are gay, straight, lesbian, bi, pan, whatever, ace. It's just, yeah, essentially, specifically, it can be, it's more often than not your sexuality, your sexual attraction. Sometimes, people might also include, like, their romantic attraction. They might not, like, outright say it, but, like, it's usually just, like, a good thing to, like, note is that, like, when someone says that they're a certain sexuality or something, they're also probably including their romantic attraction until it's being said otherwise. But yes, that's our definition on sexuality. And for gender, this is kind of like a weird one to, like, kind of define, because it's like it's something that, like, gender is, like, a thing we kind of know in a sense, because it's like we all, like, grew up in a society and, like, lived our lives and stuff, and it's like it's really, I'd say it's kind of dependent on, like, how you've sort of, like, experienced the idea of gender yourselves. I think it's really dependent on that, actually, but that's just me, I guess. But it's essentially just, like, a construct made by society about, like, how we describe something that might be, like, masculine or feminine or neither or both, like, anything like that. And it's, I don't know, it's just, it's kind of, like, a construct made by society about, like, how we describe something that might be, like, masculine or feminine or neither or both, like, anything like that. And it's, I don't know, it's just, it's kind of, like, a construct made by society about, like, how we describe something that might be, like, masculine or feminine or neither or both, like, anything like that. And it's, it's a little bit tricky to like truly define it, right? But there's the thing about microlabels is that they go into gender a lot, and they go into like what different genders, like different like subgenders that could exist, like what the idea of gender truly means. There's a lot going on there about like, you know, is it such as like being non-binary, for instance, is it really just like only like male or female, anything like that, and going more in depth of like what, yeah, probably more specifically what non-binary and like the different, yeah. So going into, I'm pretty sure is our last definition for, in terms of going into that, pronouns. So this is also kind of like a big thing as well for a lot of microlabels, and I guess they're technically not microlabels because they're neopronouns. I guess they're not really a label, but basically a pronoun is, we usually refer to like third person pronouns when we say that. It's like it's how you refer to other people, but some people may prefer certain third person pronouns for themselves, for you to refer them to. Like for instance, me, I like to use they them pronouns. So that's like a good example of like someone who, you know, typically, you know, you might use certain pronouns for somebody, but like depending on how someone might feel. This is also closely linked to like gender and stuff like that usually, but it's like, it's whatever, you know. Queerness is a whole, it's a whole thing. So it's like, yeah, it's basically just another way of like expressing yourself to other people, which, hey, you know, we're going through that, you know. So, okay, I guess this is technically our last definition. Don't worry, it's gonna be over soon. But like microlabels. Microlabels are essentially just like we have, generally in the queer communities, we have like labels anyway. Like I said, like sexualities, like gay, straight, bi, and then also stuff like genders, such as like being trans or non-binary or something of the sort, right? So it's like microlabels are essentially like lesser known like genders and sexualities, and we're also including neopronouns as well, which are like lesser known pronouns. So it's essentially like, well, like we show here with the different types of microlabels, xenogenders, neopronouns, sexualities, whether they're related to the A spectrum or not. There's a big thing there with the A spectrum. I'm arrow ace, so it's like, I know my stuff, all right? So it's like, yeah, there's a bit there. But yeah, so moving on to our like next, like, I guess big section in terms of going over this whole panel is like talking about kind of a bit of listen, microlabels have a bit of a spicy history. And it's kind of one where like microlabels kind of like, for the most part, originated like in online spaces because, you know, it's like back in the ye old days on the internet, or not that old, I suppose, but old enough, like maybe when I was like 12 or something, it would be the case where like a lot of sub-communities online would be created.
Can
where
you put a year on that?
Yeah.
So what would you say, which years would you say that would be?
It's about like the earlier years of like, forgive me for saying the T word, but Tumblr.
So like
So
2010?
2010, 2011.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
the
that's
only
about
reason we're
it.
doing that so that people who are listening in have like a time frame.
Yeah.
That's like early new teens.
2010s.
Yeah, or
That-
2010, 2011.
Okay, that
Yeah,
sounds
that's about it. Yeah, is around that time.
The
And-
Obama years.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. That's good enough. Continue.
Yeah, so it's around that time where it's like these microlabels are starting to like rise a bit, especially in like I think even like 2014, especially maybe they probably really picked up. in terms of popularity for a bit. I feel like I feel like this community is kind of like, in certain ways, like younger people who like want to engage in like micro labels and stuff are probably going on like TikTok and stuff like that now, and are probably having their own discussions about all the different micro labels, all the ones that they create or they find out about and everything. We do try to categorize it. Some people try to like really like, you know, get definitions out there and get like a dictionary of like all the micro labels, but it's a little hard to do considering people make a lot of them. But yeah. So with the like rise of like the online community of micro labels also came like a lot of people who weren't really like that into the idea of like people with micro labels like essentially being in the queer community, to like not sugarcoat it. They didn't really like a lot of people who use them. And it started a bit of a, if I may say, discourse, which is how you, yeah, I mean, that's the word for it. Yeah, but hey, I'm a philosophy major. I basically, I went through my memories and I went through like, you know, like posts and stuff, and to see like what exactly the kind of arguments people are trying to basically make. And it's like the two main conclusions that like people come to when it goes against like micro labels and stuff like that is that like usually it's either the fact that they don't count as queer or they're like problematic in some way, as you see on there. But yeah, when it comes to stuff like that, I would just say it's like, hey, just so long as like you're have awareness of like the identity you're trying to make, whether this is something for yourself or something that you just like thought up and wanted to make a flag for or something. Just so long as you're like not, you're being thoughtful about it and you're not hurting anybody, and it's like, you know, it's, you just just so long as you're like, you know, you're nice about it and everything, and we're not like, you know, not accidentally like appropriating any cultures or like doing anything that might actually be a little troublesome. It honestly, like, I don't see a reason why a lot of micro labels and stuff shouldn't be, you know, around and like used and stuff like that, because the rise of like micro labels gives a lot of rise to inclusivity, and with it seems like there's a rise of connectedness as well with like queer people, a lot more than what it used to be. And I would say part of that you could definitely attribute to the internet. But I feel like it stands to reason that like the rise of like so many people finding out they're queer, so many people connecting with other queer people, so many people talking about queerness and everything like that. I feel like something like micro labels was something that was kind of like bound to happen in some sense of the word, because like we're gonna end up like, when we find that like something doesn't quite fit us, you know, when you're like queer or something, a lot of people just like do their own thing, you know, they just make up their own term, because it's like, why not? You know, outside of like what I just mentioned about like how it could actually be harmful, it's like not really hurting anybody at the end of the day. But yeah, that's essentially that on that. I will probably write like an addendum or something, just because I'm better when it comes to philosophy arguments. I am way better with written word than I am with speaking. But I can definitely write something out if this is something we want to look into and stuff like that, because I could talk about this all day. So yes, we're good?
Yep, go.
So essentially, to make a long story short, yes, I will fight to the death. I will die on this hill. Micro-labels are indeed valid. I don't care what you say. We can talk about it. We can definitely discuss it. I'm not afraid of discussing it. Believe me. But we definitely can.
Pride's here to discuss that. Like, Comet's not doing this alone.
I will discuss it with you.
Pride is also fully behind having discussions like this.
Yeah.
You don't have to go eat yourself into a crowd of people.
Yeah, but I could.
You want to say something, Joseph? If you have to, feel free.
Yeah, but like, go ahead, do
I will have
whatever.
input later.
Okay, absolutely. We're doing this a bit more casually than we intended, which is perfectly
Yes.
fine. I feel like this is working quite well as a recording format.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
Just
yeah.
the three of us just bouncing off you occasionally.
Yeah, go for
That
it.
does seem to work well.
Yeah,
So keep going. You're
treat
still
me like a
recording.
Twitch streamer,
Still
except
recording.
like without the meanness. But yes,
New form of YouTuber.
this is not a
Listen, I might just
VTuber.
stop streaming this to Twitch. No, I'm kidding.
Do
I'm
not.
kidding.
I don't care. Honestly, I don't care either way. But yeah, micro-labels are super valid. Super love them. I've like looked into micro-labels. I don't even know. I don't think I really personally use them myself, but like I like the fact that they're there. You know, just the idea that like people are going out of their way to like find their own definition of queerness and trying to find, you know, even if there aren't like people like them, people who like may have a similar process, you know, where they try and like, where they just like trying to define it, trying to work it out, you know? It's good. But yeah, it's a bit profound, you know, they redefine a lot of things, like gender and sexuality, everything, pronouns, you know, what they truly mean and everything, and it's, yeah, there's a lot there. There's a lot there. Yeah, it's good.
That's a very nice way to put it, I feel.
Yeah?
Question from the audience. So, where would you personally like put the line between label and micro-label?
So like, I guess micro-label, for me, how I define it, it just depends on like popularity. Like, because it's like, you know, it's micro. Micro means like not a lot of people use it, you know? I feel like if a micro-label becomes, you know, popular enough, at that point it might just be a label, you know?
Okay.
It's like, is it micro anymore?
In my brain, I was like, okay, pan and omni are micro-labels under bi, and then the arrow A spectrum. No, it's a popularity thing. That makes sense too.
Yeah, I mean, that's just how I put it in my head. I don't have the answer, but like, I feel like when I think about it, that's just what I
I feel like
see.
that's a better answer.
That is a much better answer.
Because that also means that we can create new macro labels.
Yeah, because it's like, well, think of it like this: if we start defining certain more well-known micro-labels, such as like, you know, some people call arrow a micro-label for some reason. I don't personally agree with that, but it's whatever. But like, I feel like once we start labeling certain ones as like micro-labels, it's like, you know, it's like it dates the information because
I guess
after
you
a
could
little
call
while, it's not a
micro-labels
micro-label.
more like they're just labels. It's just that they're smaller in volume.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
Either from that, like it could still just be a label.
They're like little niche labels, you know.
Okay.
They're
I
like
mean,
that.
You're about to dive into them, so
Yeah.
let's keep going.
Yeah, let's go for it.
All right.
Examples of micro-labels.
Let's come.
So basically, now we have examples of micro-labels. So with this, we're going into the real meat of it. So we're getting into the xenogenders over here, which are basically micro-labels for genders. I mean, I tried to like. Here's the thing. I tried to like find micro-label genders that like weren't xenogenders, and I guess it just turns out that all of the micro-label genders are just more often than not xenogenders. So it's like,
Is there a difference otherwise? Why would you say that? Like, would you say like?
because I thought that like I thought xenogenders stood for like something else, like it was
Oh,
something.
okay.
Demi girl, demi boy, those are all xenogenders.
So are
Yeah.
all genders xenogenders? That's what I think.
Xenogender literally means outside of the.
The big three? Is that what we're calling it?
I think if you are not on the male to female aligned spectrum,
Okay.
it is a xenogender.
We can look that up. We can always
we
have a
can
crash
look into
later
it.
on. We can always do a hard code and
Listen, this may be a panel, but it's not like we have all the answers.
Yeah.
But we do have a lot of answers.
This is an opinion piece with citations.
All right. So we have some like with xenogenders, there's like a lot of like different subtypes of like xenogenders. So I know what I listed here are like noun genders, aesthetic genders. I also included neurogenders, which I didn't put the name for it on there, but we'll see it. We'll definitely see it. So yeah. So here's our first subset of like different xenogenders. And this is noun genders. So this is basically like, well, as it says on the tin, they're genders as they relate to certain nouns, such as concepts or objects, or like animals, or like, I saw one for low poly Sonic the Hedgehog. I think that counts as one. But still, yeah, there's a lot of weird genders. There's a lot of cool genders. There's a lot of genders. Yes?
Yeah. So I don't know if you're going to be talking about this, but so do different noun genders like have their own pronouns, or is that like something you choose to give? Or...
I think it's like a person by person basis.
Okay, so
It's-
you could use he, him, and still use like, as you said, a tin gender maybe.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
But you could also use different pronouns. Is that like still part of the definition?
Yeah, it's
So I can actually interject here on a linguistic side because I have studied the linguistics of alternative pronouns in the English language. Generally, when we talk about pronouns and gender, these are two distinct concepts.
Okay.
So we conflate them often, but that's not actually a linguistic thing.
All right.
So you
Okay.
can use he, him, she, her, they, them, and it doesn't actually have to reflect what gender you identify as. But as we'll probably see in a minute, a lot of people that do identify as noun gender also use neopronouns reflective of the object of their noun gender. But it's totally possible to be noun gender and use one of the he, she, they, thee, them.
And I guess the opposite also can be done then, where you can use like male, female, just the basic genders, but use different pronouns. too.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Okay. Thank
Yeah.
you. That answers my question.
There's a movement actually happening right now in French with people that are cis using an alternative pronoun to normalize it.
oh heck yeah.
All right. Okay.
Nice. So yeah, noun genders, they don't have to be like necessarily related to like just to recap our discussion a little bit with my face in the camera. Definitely like there are some like pronouns that relate to certain xenogenders, noun genders, aesthetic genders, etc. That you can use if you feel you want to use them, but again, it's definitely a case-by-case basis where it's like, you know, if you feel like you want to use those pronouns, go for it. If you feel like you want to use that gender with whatever pronouns you want, or if you don't, you know, that's also cool. It's definitely, with micro-labels, it's like, it's so chill. You can just customize whatever. It's like a character creation simulation thing, you know, it's like The Sims. Except it's like you have all the mods on, so you can make it all weird.
All right. Yeah, that works. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah, so for some examples of like different noun genders, there's like C gender. I really love microwave gender. It's like, I love that. Okay, to be fair, this looks a lot like the demi-gender flag, like one of them. It's because there's like demi-boy and demi-girl, and they look like very similar to how that flag is. I promise you this is microwave gender. It's maybe different. So yeah, and also cake gender, that's also one. So it's like, if there's a noun out there, and you like want to put a gender to it, you could just go for it. You know, if it like relates to whatever,
As
and
long
you.
as the noun is acceptable to use.
Oh, yeah.
Let's be clear about that. You can't use any
Yeah,
noun.
like please be PC.
Yeah, let's be clear about that.
Let's be, yeah, let's not be like offensive towards like people.
Yeah.
For other subtype of xenogender that we're showcasing, this is what's called aesthetic genders, and these are similar to noun genders in that they can, be like certain concepts. I mean, I feel like most aesthetics kind of have to inevitably be a concept in some way in order to be an aesthetic. So I guess most of them probably do fall under like the noun gender category. But yes, they are like, they're genders, but they relate specifically towards certain aesthetics. And what the different ones listen, on top of genders, people make a lot of aesthetics on Tumblr. This is also something that exists, but I'm not gonna get into it. But yes, people make a lot of aesthetics, so I guess they make a lot of genders of aesthetics. Yes, Dallas?
I do want to get a little bit into it, not
Go
too
for it.
much, but my question would then be like, so at what point would you say like it's just a hashtag to it becoming it's a micro-label? Like, is there a line, or are they just things that overlap, so to speak?
Oh, what?
Like
it
to
just
say
being
that
trendy?
like saying that this is my aesthetic,
Mm-hmm.
and also saying that this is my aesthetic gender.
Mm-hmm.
Like, are these separate things, or do they overlap, or how? Like, what do you think is?
I feel like an aesthetic gender is like, to differ from aesthetic, is just like, it's an aesthetic that like specifically relates to your gender and how you feel about your gender.
Okay.
Versus just an aesthetic, which is just, something you find cool, but maybe you don't want to apply it to your gender in a specific way.
An aesthetic is how you dress, and aesthetic gender is how you act.
So,
Perhaps.
or correct me if I'm wrong, but could I like to say like, aesthetic is something I can apply to or see in something else, where aesthetic gender is something I can see in my gender? Like, is that the
Yeah.
distinction I could say that?
Yeah, you could say it like that, yeah. It's
Okay.
like, you can like wear a certain aesthetic, have certain aesthetic
Okay.
of clothing or something like that, and not be a certain aesthetic gender.
Alright.
But like, if you want to, you definitely can.
Alright, that makes that. Okay, that
like,
makes sense.
like the thing about micro-labels is nobody's forcing you.
Alright.
You could just do whatever. It's fine.
Perfect.
Nobody's making you have a certain gender.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so different examples of aesthetic genders. Vampire gender, which also was in the noun gender category. But I can also kind of see like vampire gender as like an aesthetic gender, because it's like, well, the vampire aesthetic,
Is
But
that washed out on purpose? Or
Well,
like, is that flag just like that?
Don't comment on the design of the flag.
I just want to
It's-
know, okay?
Those are just the colors.
I
on
just
it.
want to know
It's-
genuinely if that's just how the colors are.
It's the Barnabas flag. It's dark shadows.
I was thinking of the vampire from the Muppets, but
The what vampire from the
the
Muppets?
Sesame Street.
The
vampire
Count?
clown.
The
Yeah.
Count? Okay, cool.
it
I'm
has
showing you
purple
better
in it.
vampires tonight.
But no, I was just gonna. The reason I just generally asking was like, is the colors like dim like that? Is that the flag? I'm not commenting on what it is. I just wanted to know if that's just the flag.
Yeah, that's just what it is. Yeah.
Okay,
They just
okay,
use like
that's all I
dark
wanted to know.
colors.
There's
Don't
no
want to
other
see it in dark mode.
implications.
Yeah. But there's aesthetic fluid. I don't know how to pronounce that to save my life, but it's essentially aesthetic fluid is aesthetic gender, but it's like being gender fluid, but with specifically aesthetic genders is what I got the gist of it, which is cool. That's like, I can kind of get that. And then there's scene choric. The reason I decided to like put that specific one on there was because I remember scene core while scene being seen. I sound so old.
You're the youngest one in this room.
Scene choric is essentially like choric, the like Quark is a suffix for different cores, like different specific aesthetics that are like pre-existing, and they have like a certain, like people like, so scene quark is essentially like the suffix of core, like different types of, like scene core, for instance, is being used here. Quark is essentially the suffix of
Night
like,
core.
of a, yeah, night core, hell yeah!
Yeah, night core.
I swore again. But yeah, scene quark is essentially like, quark is like basically when you want to put a certain core aesthetic as your aesthetic gender, so you just add quark instead. So it's like, it's quark, you know? So that's that on that. So our next topic for xenogenders, I think we have this, and maybe like one or two more, but this is going over different gender systems. Now this is actually a pretty cool theory, where it's like, there's, people try to make like different like larger systems to like categorize different types of genders that can like come about and stuff, and like what they can like mean, and like the different combinations of them and everything, and there's just a lot there, a lot of different systems, which is why I'm only featuring one of them, because there's a lot there. The camera's right there, so I'll feel not as tempted to point to them and like go over like each
We
one.
can do a vertical laser.
It's
later
fine.
on.
Just
That could work. I think it's like with how like the sun and moon are and stuff, I'm pretty sure it's like Lunarian is meant to be like a more feminine, and then Solarian is meant to be like more masculine, and then Stellarian is like third gender. Yes?
Just to quickly add, like, this is half of the actual thing. Like, if you actually go to the wiki, which we'll
Yes.
mention the sources at the end, Comet has all of those. Though, where we looked these up, or Comet actually looked these up, I didn't do
Mhm.
much. But the point is, like, this is not even the whole description
Oh, yeah.
of the Galactian system alone.
Mhm.
There is a whole other sort of inverse side to it, too, which is like a reflection of this. So
Mhm.
these systems can get really complicated and very intricate. People do take a lot of time into coming up with these.
Yeah.
I wasn't here when y'all did this part. Why is one of the genders still not unlocked?
That was just how it is on the wiki. Like, they don't have a definition. The inverse of it has one, which is also kind of incomplete. Like, we can probably bring that up in the recording, but when we look at the inverse of it, the question mark has something that's literally like half and half filled. That's the one I was complaining about,
Yeah.
about the incomplete fill. But that is supposed to like somehow represent the null to the Stellarian, where,
I feel like
Yeah,
the null
it
to
could-
the Stellarian should be asteroid.
well, that's your way of looking at it. You could make your own system, I guess.
Yeah, you can go for it.
But yeah, but that's why it's a question mark.
I mean, I did make a sans gender and spamfem gender, and
So
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, but that
but
was
yes.
my addition I wanted.
yeah, it's good. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think the question mark probably, it could mean like something that's like still non-binary, but it's like not a part. It's like a totally like separate gender away from like masculinity, femininity, their gender, you know, and what that may entail. Stellarian, could be like androgynous or something like that. Again, there's a lot there. There's a lot of subtypes. This isn't even like half of like this whole system. I think people find this system like kind of cool because it's like, it's got like that space theme, right? But it's also like, it's, in terms of like labels, micro-label systems I've seen for like genders, this is probably like one of the earliest ones that I've like seen. I don't particularly have a source or like citation for that, but I feel like it's definitely one that like has definitely hung around for like a longer time. than like some of the other systems out there. But there's a ton of other ones. Like there's ones related to like certain elements like fire or water and stuff like that. There's all sorts of like different like gender systems that like people try to make and like define and stuff. And you know, all in all, it's just like it's pretty cool. You know, there's a lot there. But again, this is just like kind of a brief overview of like all the different micro-labels and what they mean. And now we're going into different neurogenders, which are xenogenders that relate to certain like neurodivergencies or like certain mental illnesses or anything like that. For the examples that I've included, I've put down like autogender, which is associated with autism, ADHD gender, and then there's a couple associated with like different systems, whether or not you have like dissociative identity disorder. There's like different ones for that, such as like system fluid. There's a lot to go in terms of different systems, but I guess just to leave it out there, yeah, there's plenty of different genders for like if you have a certain, you know, neurodivergency and it feels like that affects your gender in some way. Yeah, there's definitely flags and definitions and stuff out there that you can definitely use, or you can make it your own. But yeah. And so for our last slide, we have like a couple other examples of like different xenogenders, since you know there's like so many. One that gets brought up a bit is mutogender, where one's gender differs a lot depending on, it differs like a lot situationally. Like again, this is like a case by case, you know, basis, and it's like depends on the person and what situations may cause a change in like gender or xenogender or anything like that. But that's like another form of gender one person can have. Another form is like, and it's pretty interesting, is like demi-xenogender. And I mean, demi is a prefix for like gender and like sexuality. I mean, it's kind of cool because it's like you can just slap it onto basically anything. And it's like, demi is kind of something where it's like you feel like you don't feel like you like totally feel this like one gender or sexuality in like a certain way. So you might like, for instance, say that you only feel in certain instances, like perhaps like mutogender, or perhaps this is something like where it's something where it's like you fit some of the criteria but you don't feel like you fit all of it. There's a lot when it comes to being demi in some way or another. But there is demi-xenogender, which is like you partially, to like abridge it, you partially feel some xenogender to some extent. And it's, I guess it's kind of like a catch-all term in that sense for other demi-xenogenders. Like for basically any gender, like we talked about, you can just put demi in front of it if you feel like you're that gender, but only like a little bit or in some specific way. So that's pretty cool. And then there's like, to touch on this a little bit, there's definitely a lot of genders associated with different kin types. So like other kin is, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's, yeah.
I don't know how to begin with that.
It's like, no.
Like different, like if you're other kin or something like that, which is I know is something that a lot of people are really, they really feel like they associate with and everything. There's like other forms of like non-human identity and stuff like that. Like when you're a part of like a certain.
Okay.
Like that. Yeah, we could definitely look into it. So there's definitely a lot of, just to wrap up this like last point in terms of genders, this is probably the last slide for xenogenders, is there's definitely a lot of genders associated with like different kin types, like other kin, which is like a popular subgroup of, you know, people who identify with certain things in a certain way. That's its own thing, its own separate thing. I don't feel like I know enough about like other kin from like an outsider perspective to really talk about it that much. But outside of that, there's also a lot of some genders associated with like being like non-human in some way. Like if you have a pre-existing identity that like that you personally have that maybe society dehumanizes a lot, like for instance having like certain disorders, or like, you know, sometimes people associate being like aro with being like non-human just because of like the common phrase of like, oh, love makes us human and stuff like that, and a lot of discourse that happens from that. But hey, ace and aro discourse is a whole other discussion. I have history on that, but this is another discussion. But yes, essentially there's definitely a lot of genders associated with that concept as well. But yeah, and those are xenogenders for you.
Okay.
Okay, so different. Now we go into what's kind of like a shorter section, is like a lot of micro-label sexualities. And this is kind of shorter because there's not as many like sub-definitions of these certain sexualities and like micro-labels as much as there is like certain neopronouns, certain xenogenders. In terms of this, I split the micro-label sexualities up into essentially micro-label sexualities that are aspec and ones that aren't, just because the asexual spectrum and aromantic spectrum are like huge. There's a lot there. I keep saying there's a lot there, but there is. There's plenty to do in the asexual spectrum and aromantic spectrum. But yes, we have those, and then we have like a lot of the other like miscellaneous micro-label sexualities and stuff like that, and what they mean. I'll be honest, some of these I don't quite remember off the top of my head exactly what they mean, but I can definitely try my best. So for aspec micro-label sexualities, again, these are essentially micro-label sexualities, sexualities that are micro-labels that are on the asexual or aromantic spectrum, or on some other spectrum of like attraction, such as like, for instance, I have aplatonic on here, which deals with like platonic attraction, which is a whole thing. But there's with so many forms of attraction, there's like all different ways to like identify in a certain way, and that's a cool thing about the ace community, is that they look into stuff like that.
I like that flag.
Yeah.
It's a very good gradient.
It's kind of like it reminds me of like the bi flag kind of in a way.
I guess that's probably why I like it.
Yeah, but it's like I kind of picked it because it's like it goes with the slides. It's like a similar color.
I really like it, but
yeah,
nothing else to say. But I think the flag's neat.
yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's good palette. So that's ace flux, which is essentially a form of asexual orientation on the asexual spectrum, where it's like you fluctuate between like being asexual in like a certain way, and then you fluctuate to like another, or maybe you don't, or maybe you fluctuate to like not being asexual, which is allosexual. So it essentially means like asexual in some way, and it like fluctuates. So yeah. And then we have like demilithromantic, which is I specifically picked this one because it's a romantic attraction, and it's also demi. So lithromantic would essentially mean like someone who may feel like romantic attraction, but they don't want it reciprocated. I think it's that specific one. And demi means that you know, maybe this happens to like a certain extent, or maybe it happens in very rare occasions, something like that. But yes, there's that one as well. And then we also have aplatonic. This is a specific one because it's definitely one that gets made fun of a lot, because people look at aplatonic and they think it means something like, oh, this means that this person doesn't want to have friends, or that they have no friends or anything like that. But it doesn't mean that particularly at all. It just means that you don't feel platonic attraction, such as like crushes like associated with friendship, which are called squishes. And essentially, aplatonic, that's just what that means, is like, it's not that you don't want friends or anything like that, or that you don't have any, but it's just that like you just don't experience any form of platonic like attraction. So yeah, that's what that means. And then we also have our non-micro-label sexualities. And these are there's a lot of interesting ones. Again, it's hard to really categorize them all, because it's like there's not as many like sub-definitions as there are with like the different xenogenders. But essentially we have, these essentially are the ones that like don't deal with like the asexual and aromantic or other sort of a something spectrums. So this can include abrosexual, which is like, oh God, I forget what that one means, unfortunately. But there's, God, I will see if I can pronounce that right. Gay sexual, which
I can tell you what abrosexual is. Shall I just fill that in?
Yeah, go for it.
So it's basically like you have different levels of sexual or romantic attraction throughout your life.
Okay, yeah, that, it's jogging my memory, yeah. Abrosexual is essentially like, yeah, your sexuality differs a bit between different sexualities, but not just in like an asexual spectrum type of way or aromantic spectrum type of way, but in specifically like different sexualities altogether. So yeah, that's what that means. Gay sexual, I wonder if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's essentially like someone who's agender who's attracted to other people who are agender, which is like, it seems like a really specific term, but it's like interesting, you know, that they have these like sub-terms for like different levels of attraction depending on, you know, how you are like gender-wise and everything. And listen, gender and sexuality are weird. I guess they're connected in some ways, but it's, again, there's a lot. Yeah, there's that. There's also I put down like bifluid on there, which means essentially means like you identify as like bisexual, but there's like some fluidity to it. Again, like you can be bisexual and have fluidity to your bisexuality and not identify as bifluid. That's totally okay. But this is just like a specific term for those who like feel that they want to have that specific like label for them. So that's what that one means. And then we also have mirror sexual, which I found was really interesting. Essentially what this one means is mirror sexual is like your sexuality is like mirrored from like somebody else. So this could be someone you're close to in your life, or like someone you look up to. It could be anything of the sort. And it's essentially like, you know, your sexuality mirrors theirs, which is like really an interesting, you know, sub, you know, micro label of sexuality. So yeah, that's our sexuality section, which is, as you can see, a bit faster than our xenogenders. But we're not out of the woods yet, because we still have to talk about neopronouns. Sounds good.
Let's go.
All right, so now we're on to different neopronouns. What neopronouns are essentially are, they're essentially different pronouns that you would use like he, him, she, her, they, them, except neopronouns are a lot more like lesser known pronouns that you don't see people typically use, but a lot of people do use them. And I would say, like, when it comes to something like this, yes, it does take a minute to get used to, but I feel like that's like that with just queer people and pronouns in general, for the most part, because it's just like, it's just something that it's like, it feels like you're working like a new part of your brain, right? Like to like purposefully call someone a certain pronoun, you know, out of respect and everything. And not that that's bad or anything, but just it's, people make the case that like for neopronouns it's like a lot harder for some reason, which I mean, I guess you can only, for me it's like the only thing I can really see is like remembering certain conjugations, but outside of that it's like not. Yep.
This is just speculation. I could probably do more research into it.
Go for it.
But I feel like from a linguistic perspective, it could be that neopronouns activate the same part of the language center that actual language learning does, which is why some people have a harder time with it than others. Because some people, oh, that's actually very interesting. I want to look more into that now, because there could be a correlation that says bilingual people have an easier time with neopronouns than monolingual people, if it is because it's activating the language center of the
I
brain.
feel like that's a research paper waiting to happen.
Yeah, that's
Generally,
cool.
Like that exact problem say you felt feels like a research gap. Like
I mean, it sounds logical. It could be completely wrong.
No, but it's a
that
good
could
thing to
still be a
research though.
Topic.
That's
Like a statistical analysis of this, it should be easy enough to conduct. Anyways,
it's good to look into. Yeah, it's no problem. Yeah, so neopronouns, yeah, they're essentially just different pronouns that you can use. Whether or not they're harder, I mean, what it really takes is just like immersing yourself in a community that uses neopronouns and just getting used to it eventually, like with anything. But yeah, for neopronouns, there's different subtypes of neopronouns, such as like noun pronouns. An interesting one that, from what I can judge, exists like almost exclusively online. They may use similar pronouns offline or something like that, but it's like so specifically online, which is just so interesting to me, is emoji pronouns, which is relatively simple once you get the use of it, because they follow like a very specific follow a very specific format for like each one essentially, and they do have that. They generally have like the same consensus on like the same conjugations, just different emojis. But yes, the Trevor Project, study done by the Trevor Project showed that around like 25% of queer youth within a certain subgroup that they studied used like a lot of different pronouns outside of just like he, him, or she, her, and this could include like using only they, them, or using certain neopronouns, as it says right there in the 4%, as well as like a combination of like all sorts of different ones, like he, him, she, her, they, them. But yeah, definitely like, you know, you can see a rise of like, there's definitely more people than you think using like neopronouns and stuff like that. They are like lesser known, but it's like, it's surprisingly often like how often you see people use these types of pronouns in like queer communities. So yeah, that's a good statistic for you. And here's our first subtype of different neopronouns, are noun self-pronouns. So like with, gosh, what was it? Noun genders? Hello, Discord. But like with different, noun genders, there's also different noun self-pronouns, which follow similar format, wherein they're based off of something like an object, animal, thing of some sort, or concept, anything of the like. Yeah, that was probably me, sorry about that. But yeah, there's all sorts of different noun self-pronouns. For the examples we included, these these two are like really popular ones. Bun and like bun self, that's relating to like bunnies, which is pretty cute. And then there's like fey fair, which deals with like, which definitely, the noun self thing there is like fairies, and like the fae, which is pretty cool. And then here's one that I looked at in terms of like I saw from like a list of like different ones, and there's like one for like void self, which is pretty cool, you know, if you like I don't know, identify in that way and you like using those pronouns. I don't know, it just seems like it's cool, you know? And that's the thing about neopronouns is that you can just use them if you want to. I mean, generally a lot of people who use neopronouns are non-binary, but it's like, it's not like a strict rule that you have to be in order to use them. But yeah, that's essentially what those are. All right, so another different type of neopronoun that people use a lot, and this is just like basically exclusively online. They may use like a similar pronoun like offline and stuff like that. I know I talked about that a little bit, but these are essentially emoji pronouns, and people will essentially take an emoji and conjugate it, you know, like a pronoun, and use that as a form of neopronoun. And it's like, it's definitely something that it's like, when people have like emoji pronouns, they more often than not have other types of pronouns along with it, just because most people who use them are conscious of the fact that you cannot really pronounce it in real life a certain way. But yes, essentially there's a lot. You can basically use any emoji and conjugate it as a pronoun. But yeah, versions of this include like ones with different hearts and like sparkles. I see those a lot. I also made up this one. Like, I didn't even look up anything for it. I just like made it because they all follow the same format. They do. It's like, it's the same conjugation format where it's like, it's the emoji, and then like a lot of them are the emoji but with the S at the end, and then it's like the emoji in itself. And I feel like they like follow that like format on purpose, just because I feel like it can get really complex otherwise. But yes, I made up the rat one because I thought it would be cool. And you know, rats, who doesn't love rats? I mean, come on. Who's not a rat enjoyer in this room?
Oh, that's a good one. Oh, enjoyer of rat.
but yes, emoji pronouns. And alongside with that, to wrap, we have another slide on neopronouns after this, I think. But this is like covering like overall neopronouns. Here's just some other miscellaneous ones that people use that don't really fall under any sort of category. I'm not going to say them all because I can't pronounce them all. But there's definitely, like, for instance, there's oneself. People use this one in general, but people will also prefer that, could also prefer that as like a third person pronoun, yes?
This is the most petty thing to possibly point out. That's not a neopronoun. That's just an accepted omnipronoun in the English language. I don't think it should be a neopronoun.
Yes, you can make that case, but as like if you looked on someone's, like, if you asked someone for their pronouns or looked on their profile or something, and they said, like, I prefer oneself pronouns, it would seem a bit out of the ordinary, right?
I guess. It doesn't break any...
It doesn't, because it's just, it's a pronoun that people use.
Linguistically, it might be fine. I think it's more about culture.
It's definitely a social aspect to it, where it's like, if I walked up to somebody and I was like, my pronouns are oneself, they would be like, huh, that's different.
Like, I
You
get
know?
the context here is like, linguistically, anyone can use she, her pronouns, but societally, people still have issues with that. I think that's the kind of context we're talking about here when it comes to that.
it's a neopronoun in the sense that like people, in terms of like a pronoun that people prefer, it's definitely a little bit more like, more obtuse, I suppose, is what you could say. And they could follow the neopronoun category in that sense. One that is like really interesting is like thon self pronouns, which are like really like, they date back like really old. They are not from this century. I don't know exact dates, but it just goes to show that a lot of, you know, neopronouns that exist aren't actually that new, but have actually existed as of for a long time as like an alternative form of a pronoun that like someone proposed at some point. So neopronouns are really interesting because some of them can have history like that, and that's pretty cool. But yes, alongside that, what's also cool to mention is that some people may sometimes want to alternate between different pronouns, or they may have like multiple sets of pronouns and they're like, oh, you can use whatever of the pronouns that I have. Or they could be like, they could just say like, I go by any pronouns at all, and they just like let people use whatever because, you know, why not? You know, it all depends on how you feel and your comfort level with, you know, pronouns. But yeah, there's definitely a lot of freedom when it comes to choosing them. I know this segment was also a bit short compared to the xenogenders, but at the same time, there's still a lot of complexity there about like what you can do with different neopronouns and how you can like change it up and like use whatever, you know? But yeah, those are neopronouns. And a resource that I've seen people recommend on like how to help get used to using certain neopronouns is pronoun.is, which is essentially a website where you can customize whatever pronouns you want on there, and then you can link it to other people, and just so long as you like put the like right like pronoun conjugations in the URL itself, it'll like automatically like show like examples of like, this is how this is used in this sentence and this is how that's used in that sentence. Another one I've seen people use, I think it's called like pronoun.xyz, something like that, where it's like there's like a whole database of different pronouns that you can link people to, and that one is also one that I've seen people use a lot. So yeah, basically it's like when it comes to pronouns, and you're a little bit confused on like how to use them, one way is that you can always just like ask the person who has them, you know, just politely, like, hey, like I know you use these pronouns, how do I say them in this case, and stuff like that. And generally, I mean like they do want to use those pronouns, so they'll probably help you, you know. So it's like that's probably not the best way to say that, but
No, that makes sense.
yeah, but yeah, they'll, yeah, you know, definitely there's, yeah, it's always polite to just ask, you know, just in case, like, you know, you don't know how to use it in a certain way or whatever the case may be, or they might direct you to a certain resource, and that's okay too. But yeah, just wanted to shout that out because I know neopronouns can get a bit complex and a bit confusing since it's something you just like actively use in a sentence. You know, it's definitely, it's like you're doing like a little bit more improv than usual, you know, when you're talking to somebody. But it's like, you know, it's how someone is referred to, you know, it's a sign of respect, you know, when you use the right pronouns for somebody, and to do so otherwise would just be disrespectful, you know? Not to get too deep into pronoun discourse, but yeah, it's just good to be nice to people. So yeah, to wrap things up, whatever labels you choose to use or describe yourself with, just one thing is that, you know, you're always a part of the queer community, no matter what. I mean, unless you don't identify as queer, or, you know, you're like straight, heterosexual, all of those things, then you probably aren't queer. But otherwise, hey, if you want to be a part of the queer community, you know, you're in, you know, and you want to have a certain, you know, gender or sexuality or whatever, and, well, there you go, it's yours.